Hi everyone, I am very sorry that there hasn't been a video every day in August like I had said. I had a 24-hour birthday stream and it went extraordinarily well. However, it exhausted me and I just could not bring myself to work on videos, and I wanted to do a premiere for Super Star Ultra just because it's this game. So I decided to opt to take the weekend off, but do not worry, we're back on track. If there are any other issues, I'll let you know, but for now, if you want to help me out, you can let me know that this video is the best by giving it a like. Let me know what you think about Kirby Super Star Ultra in the comments down below, and ring the notification bell after subscribing to really help me out. And I really need the help. Apparently, I'm only at 600 subscribers, and one of my most recent videos is about Pac-Man. Anyway, I won't drag this any longer. This game specifically, I have a lot to talk about, so let's start. It's Kirby Super Star, but remade, and with brand new content too. Ignoring the new sub-games, we have Day-to-Day making Kirby go through harder levels in Revenge of the King, Meta Knight training to become stronger in Meta Nightmare Ultra, and 2 new boss rush modes, one where you play as helpers, and another for the ultimate Kirby challenge. Returning modes like adventuring for treasure in Great Cave, racing for the trophy of unhealthiest racer in Gourmet Race, and the largely expanded dialogue in Revenge of Meta Knight are also here and accounted for. Oh geez, where do I even begin? There's just so much to unpack, but I guess a good starting point would be Superstar. The original. I don't like comparing an original with a remake directly for the series, since that isn't really the point of these videos. If this game is better than Superstar and only Superstar, for example, that isn't saying much for it being the best. However, Superstar, up to this point, was very commonly thought to be the best in the series, and I detailed why in great detail in my video talking about it. It pretty much did everything that you would want this franchise to do, while introducing new ideas that pioneered the series going forward. And unlike the other remake, Nightmare in Dreamland, Ultra is almost unanimously considered to be an improvement. And no, it isn't only because you can get rid of your ability in the press of a button instead of having to make a helper. Although that's one of the big reasons, yes. The core of why Ultra is considered an improvement is really simple. The way that Kirby feels to control in this game is much more natural, what we expect from the series. Kirby's animations feel a lot more in tune with what this round, bloppy body is doing compared to the original. Notably, running doesn't have the weird wind-up feel to it. When Kirby runs, it's a quick but gradual build-up. There are other improvements, especially in terms of Kirby's floating, but the easiest to notice for any player will be the simplest, and in this case, that's the cuckoo crazy act of moving around. But what about the game modes where Kirby is actually doing the moving around? The old ones all have a fresh coat of paint, which we'll talk about later, but the improvements to the controls make these modes all feel so fun to move through. Even Spring Breeze is more fun to blast through than some Kirby games in their entirety, and that's because of how good the movement feels. It's like the Amazing Mirror movement was put into Superstar and made faster and more precise. I don't think the actual game speed is faster or slower than Amazing Mirror, but being able to do things like start your float and immediately being able to shoot out an air pop, for example, is something that the GBA Kirby games limited you from doing. Superstar felt like it had no real limits, but didn't have the looseness that the GBA games had. And it isn't like Ultra is just borrowing from previous games either. Well, for the actual moves and movement and such, yes it is, but for the physics and feel to it, Ultra is definitely one of a kind. And this is where the copy abilities come in. Superstar did an amazing job giving these abilities full-blown movesets, but later games made them a bit easier to use, less prone to getting hit and all, you know? And of course, no other game up to this point really had full-blown movesets, even Squeak Squad, so Ultra was now put in a tight spot. How do you take the abilities from Superstar, but make them all functionally work? A lot was done here, but the most obvious point was that a lot of the abilities were given better range, invincibility, or both. That isn't all, of course. I bully Sword a lot, but the fact that it has a dash attack that actually goes through enemies and keeps a good pace going for the first time in Kirby history is astonishing, but the easiest improvements to the abilities to notice are these. Especially the invincibility. Going back and playing a lot of the older games, it's very easy to get hit. This was a point of frustration for many with basically every Kirby game so far. Even Superstar, even if it was to a much smaller extent. Even in games like Dreamland 3, where you don't technically lose your ability every time you get hit, you still feel the frustration, you know? With Ultra controlling so well and the abilities finally functioning at their full potential, this isn't a problem anymore. You'll still lose your ability, but for the first time, it never really feels like the game's fault. The movement also feels a lot better here. It even makes the old modes feel more fresh. The movement also feels a lot better than in pretty much any game that's come before, and even just comparing it to Superstar, it makes the old modes feel way more fresh. I touched on this briefly, but even though the game modes themselves are the same, it still feels like a totally different experience. Gourmet Race may as well be a new game mode with how much better it feels, with physics that actually make logical sense, and abilities that all feel like they exist to speed you up. And succeed, of course. But even modes like Great Cave feel a lot less janky, and no, it's not the updated visuals or new names for the treasures, although as a Fire Emblem fan, I appreciate that a lot. It's having a map, it's having all of the items on the bottom screen when you pause, and the load times being faster, so you can see what you missed without having to wait for the longer KSS load times. It's knowing what treasures you've gotten in any area on the bottom screen, whenever. It's taking normal damage from every enemy and not like a million. But at the same time, it isn't a total cakewalk since all of what made Great Cave difficult, minus the total nonsense, is all here and accounted for. You know what else? Being able to select your ability on the bottom screen of Milky Way Wishes? Brilliant. Easily. Way better than anything Squeak Squad did with the bottom screen. Even things you wouldn't assume affect the game as directly, like the dialogue for Revenge of Meta Knight being on the bottom screen, keep the distractions away from the top screen where the action is. And if you do want to read the dialogue, that's fine, because it either stays on there long enough to give you enough time to read the wonderfully wacky and heavily improved dialogue, Rasa Flasa Brasa Arg, while also keeping the real meat and potatoes gameplay distraction-free. Outstanding! Ultra is also fascinating as a bit of a transitional piece. It's a game for the DS with GBA DS feeling physics as a remake of Superstar, an older game with a lot of mentalities that go into an older game. However, this was the first game directed by Shinya Kumazaki, the one in charge of the modern Kirby games, or as I'll call it now so this video can actually try to age well, the Return to Dreamland era. Games that put a lot of focus on the flow of gameplay and over-the-top action-y set pieces with light puzzle solving to add variety. You can really see a lot of what Kumazaki would do in later games here, especially the added invincibility to dash attacks. But unlike those games, this still feels like an older Kirby. And Kirby doesn't move or jump or slide or feel like he does in all of the games after Return to Dreamland. There's still a unique feeling to this that falls more in line with what developers were doing with Kirby before anything was really set in stone. This gives Superstar Ultra a flavor entirely of its own, likely to never be replicated again. It also just dawned on me while speaking about newer games that I haven't even covered the new content yet. There's a lot to unpack, but to keep it simple, they all offer a new perspective on what the franchise had been doing up to that point. Again, that sounds a lot like a Kumazaki game, doesn't it? Anyway, Revenge of the King acts as the extra mode to Spring Breeze, and while it isn't as absurd and over the top, it definitely makes mindlessly going through levels much harder, so it accomplishes the same goal. There's a lot of story beats towards the end, of course, but we're just sticking with the gameplay for now. Revenge of the King is very well placed in this game, becoming unlocked after you clear Milky Way Wishes. It's a more structured adventure, but it's also a tad shorter, trimming the fat while keeping a lot of what made the late game modes fun, that being levels with actual meat and potatoes to them. And, of course, the final level where you approach Dedede as he gets more and more panicked, parrying Revenge of Meta Knight is amazing, but if we're only going to be focusing on gameplay here, it does feel really satisfying, beating a ton of mini-bosses, even kind of funny when Bandanity shows up, but nothing tops getting offered that hammer in a pitch-black room, fighting day to day with the strongest ability in the game, only to find out that he can use attacks that just ignore hit stun, so using a close range ability like that can be very risky, unless you go for dash attacks, which will make the fight feel super long. Absolute perfection. This, combined with some of the other elements of the mode that I never got to touch up on, make this my favorite mode in the game. I know I'm trying to generally be more objective here, I just wanted to bring that up. I want to have fun too, okay? But the game keeps on kicking right after that with Meta Nightmare Ultra and Helper to Hero. Having both the arena modes and Helper to Hero is something I don't understand why future Kirby games have never done since. Ability solos are amazing, helpers are amazing, playing the arena as initially intended by swapping abilities is amazing. Just give us these options. There's point number 5,100 million gazillion as to why this is the best game. As for Meta Nightmare Ultra, it's also perfection. Literally everything a speedrunner could want. You're timed. Each mode that you get to blast through has its own in-game time, or IGT, tracked. Meta Knight is faster than Kirby. You even have power-ups you can use by building up these blue orbs you get by beating enemies and bosses. Words don't even begin to describe just how fun Meta Quick is. And do I even need to bring up the final boss here? Great! Of course, there's also the True Arena, which is probably the hardest thing in any Kirby game up to this point, with very little competition. Maybe some speedruns are harder, but on a broader level, nothing really comes close. That said, it's very short, so once you get into a rhythm, it's a lot easier to get better times in this mode compared to, I don't know, every other Kirby boss rush. This has the perfect balance of length and difficulty, the intensity of the final four, and even a brand new boss fight. I don't spoil the final fights in these videos, except Dreamland 1 for some reason, but I'm sure you've all heard about this one. Literally heard the scream. For all of these modes and the old ones, replay value is heavily incentivized by going through with different abilities, made even easier by the fact that Ultra is a portable game, so you can take it with you on the go, on top of it being released late enough, it being a DS game, to have sleep mode. You can close the screen easy peasy and just get back to it whenever you want. The DS was just great like that, and oh, hey, this has been going on for, like 13 minutes now. We're still on the first part of the video? Huh. Okay, well, I'll stop rambling for now. The thing about everything that I've said thus far that's really important is that none of this is personal bias. I know this is my favorite Kirby game and all, but I'm only mentioning things like the movement, the game flow, and the abilities. I'm not mentioning how much I love Parasol in this game specifically, or how I appreciate that they actually localized the Fire Emblem nod. Except I kind of did bring that up, but you know what I mean. Or how I like Spring Breeze so much, I actually attempted it blindfolded before blindfolding speedruns were a thing and I could actually clear it as a kid. Even getting into specifics, I'm talking about why these things are all good on a general level, not why I like them. Surprise, surprise, not all of that overlaps. Some things, like being able to juggle enemies with air puffs, isn't a deal breaker for most, but this is the only game where I personally enjoy doing it. But you know what? I didn't bring it up because that's just me, or at least a small few. It's not broad. So everything said has nothing to do with my own personal biases, and is in fact only part of why Kirby Super Star Ultra is the best game in the series. Forget it, I'm not doing this. You know what I didn't get to gush about? The presentation, and I'll start with something a lot of people immediately dismiss, the soundtrack. This is the one aspect where I think freely comparing it to the original is fair, not only because comparing music is so subjective anyway, but also because both games have such legacy soundtracks. While the common consensus seems to be that the original has the better soundtrack, like I said, music, very subjective point. Less objective are, as mentioned, the impact and the legacy of the tracks themselves, and I would argue that Ultra somehow manages to go toe-to-toe with the most influential soundtrack in the series. Yeah, Superstar even beats out Dreamland 1 in this regard. With ease? Maybe. And in fact, Ultra may have more to offer. All of the original tracks are there, although since Superstar introduced them, a lot of the credit can go there. But think about the tracks that Ultra introduced. Having Castle Lololo be Dynablade's theme like an air ride was a great touch, and it even carried over to Wham Bam Jewel and Helper to Hero. Things like the tracks for the new minigames are fun. There's some new creepy tracks that you can add to the list, like the rest area music for the Final Four and the True Arena. But for the iconic stuff, you have things like the Kabula fight and the Heavy Lobster fight, things that weren't present in Superstar at all and have left a memorable impressions on the fans, enough to get remixed a few times in the future and be recognized outside of the fan base. That's pretty nifty. Of course, everybody knows the big two tracks from this game, Masked Day and Galactonite. Galactonite and his theme truly need no introduction, but this is possibly the most iconic example of a what the hell is this doing in a Kirby game? Did I just say hell? Track in the entire series, and it's fantastic. Masked Day's theme, while borrowed from Superstar Stacker of all things, still really caught on with Ultra. Even more than Galactonite's theme, this one was used in the games constantly, and just like Galactonite's theme is recognized both in and out of the fanbase as one of the greatest of all time. These both really got their start in Ultra, and while you really can't deny the heavy hitters from Superstar, Ultra manages to at least come close to, if not surpass, the original in terms of legacy music. Where it definitely surpasses the original, though, is in the graphics. KSS isn't a bad-looking game by any means, but Ultra's colors just have a way of popping out really nicely. Definitely far better than any of the GBA games, plus Speed Squad. It actually reminds me of Kirby 64 in how everything in the foreground and back helps draw you in. Whereas Kirby 64 used that to immerse you, arguably to its own detriment, Ultra has it right. Make the game pleasant to look at without drawing too much away from the game itself. Kirby isn't made slow to complement the visual style and camera and all that jazz. You move at a speed that feels good, but you can take a gander at these great-looking backgrounds and not be punished for it. Character sprites are also really good and share that visually pleasant color scheme that backgrounds do. Of course, these are sprites, so the outlines are thick enough to where nothing really blends in with the background. And at the same time, they're never too much. Too many bright colors hurt the eyes or can look weird to a lot of people, but again, there's never too much of it. The artists are smart to pick when the game used darker colors, as they not only look really cool, but they aren't the dreary kind of dark. If dark pastel is a thing, it genuinely is, and that's what I'd use to describe when the game gets less bright. It still pops out while managing to look different. I don't want to keep this going on for much longer than it has to. I kind of added this at the end here as a bit of a joke at first, and then I realized, oops, I had so much more to say, and it just kept going. But the upgraded visuals even help with the stories told in these games. It's just a lot easier to convey information with two screens. Visuals on top, dialogue on bottom. But the dialogue for modes like Revenge of Mennonite and Revenge of the King were made a lot better with incredible sprites and facial expressions. Shocked Bull is sorely missed, but that's kind of it. Otherwise, these are all big improvements on everything that's come before or since. And before I start to ramble again, please, let's move on. Okay, fine. I can spare some time for this. As per usual, anything regarding the original Superstar just does not count. We're looking for why this is a singular worst, blah blah blah. We're also trying to stay as far away from subjectivity as possible, so music is out of the picture too. Not that this game has bad music, it really is just a Superstar did it better kind of argument. And that one right there is a big double whammy. It's really hard to think of an argument for why Ultra would be strictly considered the worst. I'm not memeing this time, it genuinely is. Since any critique that can be thrown at this game, and trust me, there are critiques that can be thrown at this game, can be thrown at another one, and most likely, Superstar Ultra isn't nearly as bad of an offender. As mentioned, there are definitely things in the game that you can complain about, even things that I don't like. But using I don't like it as an argument without all that much to back it up does not work for this kind of video. And I've heard of complaints before, sliding off ledges doesn't have the momentum that it feels like it should. The movement maybe isn't for everybody. The new modes aren't really all that new. I get it, there are arguments, but they're either really small in the grand scheme of things, or, as mentioned before, definitely worse in plenty of other Kirby games. It really doesn't have that much going against it. This is the only game with the insanely compressed cutscenes, I guess, but, wow, sick burn. That sure convinced me that this is the worst game in the series. When I was thinking about what to do for this part, that realization hitting me, but believe it or not, was when it struck. Super Star Ultra is very clean, very polished, and very well put together, but what is it really doing? Every game up to this point has had something big introduced to make it a unique experience, unlike other Kirby games. And even games like Nightmare and Squeak Squad had Meta Nightmare or the bottom screen. Dreamland 3 may have borrowed Animal Buddies, but it put all of them in this wonderfully creative environment. Kirby 64 may not have had any major gameplay changes, but it was 2.5D, and you could combine abilities together. This isn't to mention the insane ones like Dreamland 2, Superstar, Adventure, Amazing Mirror. When thinking about what new things that Ultra brought to the table, it's really the new modes, which aren't all that new. The True Arena is the only one that really comes to mind, but even that is just another Kirby boss rush. This is the first Kirby game that really doesn't feel like it's doing anything new, borrowing already established ideas and using already polished assets from games that actually had to try to feel worth it. Why go that far when you're a remake of an already popular game? Just use the modernized controls and you're set. This definitely opened up a lot of floodgates for me. Sure, the different game modes in Superstar were annoying, but that was the game's way of trying to bring fresh new ideas to the table. Every game mode stood out and was a crazy brand new thing. Here, it's got all of the same issues, but that creativity that was involved with the original Superstar, poof, all gone. The abilities were more simplistic in previous games, but every game had some cool or weird new additions to make abilities feel fresh, while Ultra just uses a more polished version of Superstar. A lot of people take issue with where the franchise went, starting with Return to Dreamland, but honestly, you can trace that back here. The new content, as mentioned, is not very new, and the old content doesn't do much when that sparkle, that drive to innovate, isn't there. And that's why Kirby Super Star Ultra is the worst game to make an argument for being the worst game in the series. Yeah, no, even when that realization hit me, the first thing I thought was, yeah, no, that point's not doing it. I already kind of covered why that argument doesn't really even work, so let's just move on and say that I brought up a good point. For the first time, when I asked my Discord server what they thought of a game, everyone's reactions were positive. Were there issues people had? Of course, no game is perfect, even though this one is. But bare minimum, everyone really liked it. Was that just because they all knew it was my favorite game? Maybe, who knows, but it was still very nice to have more than a small handful of answers without seeing much negativity, especially considering the game in question. I also learned what the adjective Kino means. Good to know? Remember way back in the best worst video for Dreamland 2, where I said there was one game that I had a more concrete opinion on? To the surprise of absolutely nobody, this was the one. I like to think of myself as very open-minded, but everyone has their limits, and anything but the highest praise for Superstar Ultra is where I have to draw the line in the sand. I'm not gonna get intensely angry and start yelling at people for no reason because they have different opinions or anything, but having played it since the day it came out in 2008, there hasn't been a single major critique of this game that I've agreed with. I can think of small stuff. The music of Superstar as a whole, even I think is a bit better, but because music is so subjective, who can really say? Superstar was a lot wilder, which led to things like enemies dealing more damage, inadvertently making the game harder, and really weird speedrun skips. Fair point, but that doesn't mean that Ultra has poor difficulty or really cool speedrun tech. On the whole, thanks to the new modes, I would actually argue that Superstar Ultra is the harder game. You could also argue that despite all of its good traits, it's still just a remake. And yeah, if this game was fully original, that would have been crazy, but it looks and feels so different with a ton of gameplay tweaks that it's really kind of hard to care. Oh, but the cutscenes, they're so compressed. Yeah, and you know what? I love them that way. It has its own unique Nintendo DS charm, you know? It's like looking at a PlayStation or N64 game, how they look all blocky. You'll love that stuff. My point is, it's all small little nitpicks, some of which even then I don't agree with. I do think, even on a less personal level, Superstar Ultra is the Kirby game with the least going for it in terms of being the worst. Planet Robobot comes close, but even that game has ammunition going against it beyond any personal grievances. If I had to think of one real issue that I had with it, on my DS, the game always sounded a little bit quiet. It's not the audio balancing, that was fine. I just felt like the game could have been louder. Yeah, we have to dive really deep to find any kind of a complaint, huh? I'd recap what it is about this wonderful game that I love so much, but there's really no need. Everyone here already knows. There's still one point that I want to reiterate though, and that's that the original Kirby Superstar is still amazing. These two games actually go hand in hand wonderfully together, unlike Adventure and Nightmare. Both of those are good, don't get me wrong, but only in a few rare instances would I actually recommend both to someone. The Superstar games, it's fine, just go nuts and play both. They're so similar and so different in so many ways, while both being incredible for completely different reasons. How a remake managed to be so good, so definitively better than the original, but still managed to be different enough from said original to not make it worse while still being a remake is something I don't think I'll ever understand. If it were up to me, the overwhelming majority of this channel, my Twitch, my Twitter, Discord, whatever, it would all just be Superstar Ultra. It's turning 14 years old pretty soon, and it's just not gotten old yet for me. I can talk about this game forever. Pretty evident by how much longer this video is than all of the others like this one. But to wrap it up, this is my favorite game of all time. Not just my favorite Kirby game, or DS game, or a Nintendo game, my favorite game, period. And you know what? Never say never. I'm very open-minded to another game eventually toppling this one. It's been 14 years and not very many games have come close, but hey, you never know.